So this is the second part of the lecture about proprioception. Proprioception falls under the umbrella of motor control and trying to understand how the neuromotor system works so that we can coordinate our bodies. So we have to understand the system. And proprioception really is about the parts of the nervous system that are important in motion. In this part of the lecture, we're going to cover a little bit about the basics of the nervous system, and we'll learn about two proprioceptors. Now, you've probably learned about the nervous system throughout your education. The nervous system is composed of the brain and the spinal cord, and also nerves that extend from the spinal cord and go out to various parts of the body. And we can divide the nervous system into what's called the central nervous system, which is the brain and the spinal cord, and the peripheral nervous system, which are all the nerves that are attached to the spinal cord and go out to the body. So all of those nerves that are pictured in blue are the peripheral nervous system. And the interesting thing about those nerves is that they're kind of like one-way streets. They send signals one direction. So you have some nerves or neurons that are called efferent neurons. Efferent neurons go from the spinal cord out to the body, and they attach to muscles. So efferent nerves are essentially motor nerves or motor neurons, and what they do is they send signals to muscles and we contract them. So that's very important for us in motion. Afferent nerves or afferent neurons go the opposite direction. They go from parts of the body toward the spinal cord. So these are nerves that provide the brain and spinal cord information about, for example, if my hand is open or closed. I have to be able to sense that, and so I have sensory receptors in my joints and in my skin. When those signal, the signals go toward my spinal cord up to my brain, and my brain has to be able to figure out the positioning of my body. So efferent nerves go from the spinal cord to a muscle, that direction. Afferent nerves start with a proprioceptor somewhere in the body, and they send signals toward the spinal cord. Now I have one more kind of nerve or neuron in the peripheral nervous system that is actually located in the spinal cord. These are called interneurons. And if we think of those efferent and afferent nerves as one-way streets, an interneuron is kind of like a traffic circle. The interneuron connects a signal from one kind of nerve to another. And we'll see a special example of that where signals come from your muscle and goes toward the spinal cord, and then the interneuron relays it back to an efferent nerve that goes back to the same muscle. So it redirects the signal. So afferent nerves connect the spinal cord to parts of the body, and they always connect to some kind of a sensory receptor, something that is going to detect something and send signals toward the brain. And there are different kinds of sensory receptors. There are exteroreceptors that are receptors that tell us things about our environment, like if it's cold outside. There are interoreceptors that tell us things about our internal functions, such as I'm really hungry right now. And then we also have proprioceptors. These are sensory receptors that are involved in motor control, or our sense of proprioception. So proprioceptors help us or tell us things about our body positioning, and they're really important for our sense of proprioception. So let's try to cover a couple of them. The first of the proprioceptors are called mechanoreceptors. Now you will notice that on the rest of these slides, I have kind of three entries. Where is this receptor, its location? When does it signal? And how is this information likely used? Or what is it good to tell us about? What does it tell us about? So mechanoreceptors, where are they? They're in our skin. So right now, you might be sitting down, and if you close your eyes, you can sense that there is pressure on the back of your legs and on your behind and on the back of your back, right? As the chair presses against you. And you can also likely feel that your feet are pressed on the ground. All of those are because the mechanoreceptors in your skin are signaling. When do mechanoreceptors signal? Well, one, they signal, of course, whenever something's pressing on our skin. Second, our mechanoreceptors also signal whenever our skin moves. So whenever we are actively involved in some motion, particularly around a joint that can move a good bit, like in your hands, you can bend and straighten your fingers. In your elbows, you can flex and straighten your arms. So as you move around, that skin necessarily moves. If you're doing a bicep curl, as your arm goes up, the skin that's in the front of your elbow kind of squishes together like an accordion, and the skin on the back of your arm stretches. And so the back of your arm and the front of your arm mechanoreceptors are activated because your skin is being stretched and squished together. Your skin is moving. So how is this information likely used? Mechanoreceptor information helps us position our body parts against surfaces. And it's very, very important in how we position our body against things, and how accurately we can maybe position certain body parts, especially, for example, in our hands. We have a lot of mechanoreceptors in our fingers, and whenever we type or hold a pen, then we have to be able to position our fingers correctly, and the mechanoreceptors are greatly involved in us understanding how our hands, for example, are positioned on the keyboard, where they're located, and which keys they're pressing on. Mechanoreceptors also help us to adjust some forces. So whenever you are pressing against something, let's just say you're writing with a pencil, you have to produce the right amount of force against the pencil so that you can mark the paper, and you don't want to press too hard and break your lead. And so the mechanoreceptors are helping us understand forces that we are using against surfaces. There's a couple of other little things about mechanoreceptors. How do we know about mechanoreceptors? Well, one of the ways we can study it is we can try to deaden your skin somehow. I could put your hand in an ice cold bucket of water until it gets numb, and then I could ask you to type on a keyboard, and I might find out, wow, with your hand being numb, it's very difficult for you to position your fingers right, and you'll make a lot of errors. Now, we haven't damaged your mechanoreceptors by putting your hand in some cold water, but we have deadened your skin or prevented those signals from reaching your brain. If you go to the dentist, you get anesthesia stuck in your mouth, and you might realize, wow, I have a hard time eating, or I might bite on my tongue because you really can't sense the position of your mouth and your tongue because, again, you can't feel it. You can't feel your skin. I have another little item there about something that's called peripheral neuropathy. This is damage to peripheral nerves, and the symptoms include tingling and numbness and lack of sensation that often's in your hands or your feet. And this is most commonly a problem for people who have diabetes. Diabetics gradually lose sensation in their extremities. And so, again, it's not that you've damaged the mechanoreceptors, it's just that the nerves don't transmit those signals anymore. So if we were just a big bag of skin, we would really be able to tell a lot of things about our body positioning by sensations that we get from surfaces pressing against us. But we're not just a big bag of skin. We actually have other proprioceptors. One of them is called the muscle spindle. Now, where is the muscle spindle? Well, logically, it's in the muscle, and it is. It's between and within individual muscle fibers. And I have a picture of a slinky or a spring, and that's a pretty good metaphor for a muscle spindle. So there's a person up there who's stretching. She has her foot up on a chair, and her hamstring muscles are being stretched greatly. And so if you imagine that your hamstring muscle has a muscle spindle or a spring inside it, and you stretch that muscle, then the muscle spindle, the slinky that's inside your hamstring, stretches. And so that's really what the muscle spindle is all about. It senses whenever you have muscles that are being stretched. And so that's whenever it activates. It activates whenever you have a muscle that is being stretched. So the muscle spindle is activated or fires whenever I'm stretching a muscle. What happens whenever the muscle spindle is activated? Or how is the information used? Well, whenever we move around, certain muscles of ours are stretched. And whenever we sense a stretch, it tells us likely the position of our body. Again, I'll use the example of doing a bicep curl. Whenever you lift the weight up, the muscles on the back of your arm, your tricep, are stretching. And so those tricep muscles, muscle spindles signal, and it tells your body, well, you are bending your arm. That's the only way those muscles will stretch. If you put your arms out to your side and move your arms backward and stretch the muscles in your chest, the muscle spindles in your chest are stretching, and your body, your brain figures out, well, you are pushing your arms back. That's the only way those muscles would stretch. Because you've used your body before and you understand, well, if these muscles are being stretched, then this tells me something about my body position. Now, if that was the end of the story, the muscle spindle would still be pretty interesting, but it's not. Because the muscle spindle is involved in something that's called the stretch reflex or the myotatic reflex. That's a misspelling on my slide. Myotatic is M-Y-O-T-A-T-I-C. So what's the myotatic reflex? The myotatic reflex is kind of like when you stretch a rubber band and there's a tendency for the rubber band to return to its normal position. Whenever you stretch a muscle, you have an involuntary reflexive contraction of the same muscle that protects you from injury. So if you, again, put your arms out to your side and stretch your arms back as far as you can, you will notice that the muscles in your chest begin to contract to pull your arms back forward. It's a reflexive, involuntary contraction of a muscle that's being stretched. Again, think about a rubber band that you stretch, it wants to recoil. Now, I'm going to show you a couple examples of the stretch reflex. One of them that's pretty common is something that happens in a doctor's examination. If you go and get a physical, at some point the doctor's going to have you sit on a table and is going to take this little hammer out, and you guessed it, they're going to hit you with that hammer. They're going to actually try to tap you right underneath your kneecap. You'll see in the picture that right below your kneecap, there's a little gap between the bones. And you have a patella tendon. You have a tendon that stretches over the kneecap and touches down on the lower leg bones. So what the doctor does is he or she taps you with this hammer. Now, if you can picture it, if I tap you with this hammer, it pulls on your patella tendon, right? It yanks down on your patella tendon a little bit, which stretches your quadricep muscle. Use that picture there and think that if I just pulled down on your patella tendon or pulled down on your leg, it would make your quadricep muscle stretch. Now, it doesn't stretch a lot, but it stretches pretty quickly. So what happens whenever the doctor taps you with that hammer? If you follow along with me, your quadricep muscle stretches. the muscle spindle in your quadricep muscle, of course, signals, hey, this quadricep muscle is being stretched. The signal, using the blue or the green arrows there, goes up an afferent neuron toward the spinal cord, because the signal's going toward the spinal cord. In the spinal cord, it reaches an interneuron. That's a relay neuron, or a little traffic signal that's in the spinal cord. And you can see that in the picture. There's a little diagram, the arrow points to an interneuron. The signal goes on the afferent neuron to the spinal cord. It connects to an interneuron, and the interneuron feeds the signal back using an efferent neuron, an efferent nerve. Remember, we learned about motor nerves. Sends a signal back down the efferent neuron toward the quadricep muscle, which makes the quadricep muscle contract. And when you contract your quadricep muscle, it makes your foot kick out a little bit. So the doctor in a physical is doing a test of one of the proprioceptors. It's finding out if the muscle spindle and this myotatic reflex is functioning. Again, taps under your kneecap causes a stretch in your quadricep muscle. The signal goes from the muscle spindle along an afferent neuron to the spinal cord. It connects to an interneuron. It goes back via an efferent neuron back to the same muscle, the quadricep, and the quadricep contracts. So when you stretch a muscle, the stretch reflex or the myotatic reflex causes the same muscle to contract. And you've likely done that before. But there's even more to the story. Because today, if you've exercised or you train people, you will notice that whenever we train particularly athletes, we don't have them move slowly. We actually have them perform what are called plyometrics or plyometric exercise. I have some pictures of some plyometric exercises. A plyometric exercise, by definition, is an explosive movement, right? It's not moving slow, that starts with an eccentric muscle lengthening, so a stretch, immediately followed by a contraction, a concentric exercise. So you stretch a muscle and then you contract it. You stretch a muscle and then you contract it. And when you do this, when you stretch a muscle, it causes the myotatic reflex to occur, which creates a more intense muscle contraction. So why do we do that with athletes? Well, we understand that these kinds of plyometric movements, stretch a muscle and then contract it, increases our power, our ability to move explosively, and that translates into better athletic performance, jumping higher, running faster. So you see a few examples there. The person who's doing push-ups is lowering themselves down and then pushing up hard to throw themselves up off the ground, and then they have to catch themselves. And whenever you catch yourself on the ground in a push-up position, it stretches those chest muscles, which allows them to contract harder. Box jumping is another typical plyometric exercise. Then I have some people who are doing some kind of group exercise, and they're holding an object, and they are jumping from side to side and swinging this medicine ball. So there's a stretch and then a contraction as you throw it up. And then when you lower the weight, stretch and then contract. Now, the stretch reflex and the muscle spindle are the basis for plyometric exercise. In this picture, you see a woman who's doing a basic plyometric rebound exercise where she steps off of a platform, lands in a crouched position, and then jumps up high. So when you land on the ground, it causes you to stretch all the muscles in your legs. So your gluteus maximus in your behind, your quadricep muscle in the front of your thighs, and your gastrocnemius, your calf muscle. All three of those big muscle groups have to stretch whenever you land, and then the stretch reflex is induced, and that person can jump up higher than she could have if she would have just jumped without first stepping off the box. So when you do plyometric exercise, explosive kind of exercise, you're using the stretch reflex for you to produce a powerful action. Now that's pretty cool.